Thank you so much. Thank you for coming out so early in the morning. So today, this talk about peerocracy is about a very simple thing. It's about you. It's about me. It's about us. It's about people. It's about personhood. And perhaps whether we still have it in our current digital networked age. It's about a very simple question. Are we people or are we property? So, to start you off, I want to introduce you to a new site. Now, some of you in the audience might be venture capitalists. Any venture capitalists here looking to invest? Any investors? Any people working in advertising companies? I can't really see you. Anyone working on behavioral advertising? You work on the web, right? You're all working on behavioral advertising, yeah. So this is a site called The Spinner that you might be very interested in. This site was launched a few months ago. And The Spinner is a service that enables you to control articles presented to a specific person on the websites that they usually visit, right? This person is known as the target. Does this sound familiar to some of you in the work that you do? So they see the same message as they're browsing the web. And you can buy this as a service. So what kind of messages can you target at someone by being a customer of The Spinner? Well, you could, for example, have a message, get your kid a dog. Isn't that nice? Like, so if you want your parents to buy you a dog, you could make sure that your parents see this message as they're browsing the web. That's kind of nice, right? So what other kind of messages that, this is all from the website, by the way. These are screenshots. Propose marriage. Target boyfriend. So you want your boyfriend to marry you. Okay, all right. What else? Oh, find a new job. The target is a work colleague. Okay, all right, And this is the one they launched with. This is the one that they had their marketing around. Initiate sex. Target wife. I'm not making this up. I wish I had thought of it, because it's such a great example of everything that's wrong with the web today. But this is real. This is a real site. They really launched with this, and it's perfect. So how does it work? They have a frequently asked questions. How does it work? Well, the articles, along with their catching headlines, are chosen by a group of psychologists in order to affect people on a subconscious level. And then in their fact, they say, well, how come the target is the only one that sees it? Well, it's something called native advertising. Have you heard of this? It's what the web's made of, right? It's retargeting. So when I first heard about this, I tweeted about it quite angrily. And I said, look, this is how Google makes money. This is how Facebook makes money, right? And the guy who made this, his name is Elliot, he emailed me. And he said, I saw your angry tweets. I want you to know that after negative items in the media, we sell more of our products. So thank you so much. Now, for those of you working in the web industry, for those of you working in behavioral advertising, the web industry, I don't know if you know what just happened. You had your Martin Shkreli moment. That's who Elliot is. He's our Martin Shkreli. Before that, we knew the pharmaceutical companies were pretty shit, but we didn't know how shit they could be, right? Now we do. And it's the kind of world that we've created that has resulted in one man today having more intimate insight into the lives of more people in the world than ever before. And this same person currently has 60 people working at his company to literally read your mind. And he says that's okay, because privacy is dead, right? You have to understand, he's talking about your privacy, not his. Because when he buys a house, he buys the 4 houses around his house, because his privacy is alive and well. Thank you very much. So why? Why is this? Is he just like a really naughty guy? Or no. This is the business model of his company. This is how he made his billions. This is why he's one of a handful of billionaires in the world, right now, who has more wealth combined. The top 8 have as much wealth as about half the world's population today. This is the business model of his company, Facebook. This is how Facebook works. Facebook has its users. These are the people who don't pay Facebook. And it has its customers. These are the organizations that do pay Facebook. And the way Facebook makes money is it watches, tracks, and stores everything that its users do, the data, right? And then continuously analyzes them to create living, breathing profiles of them. Think of them as simulations of you, little simulations, good or bad. They both have ramifications. And this is what they monetize with their actual customers. Now, this is not a mistake. Mark didn't mess up. It wasn't like, oops, I've made a few billion. Sorry, using the. No, this is systemic. This is how this business works. This starts from the very beginning when Mark has a startup and he needs money. So he goes to a venture capitalist. And he says, hey, venture capitalist, this is my business model, the one that you invest in. How much money will you give me today if I can promise you in 5 years, 6 years, maybe 100 million, 200 million users? How much money will you give me today for when we sell the company and we sell those users either to another company with the same business model or to the public with an IPO in 5 years' time? In other words, how much will you invest in my exit? You have to understand, venture capital does not invest in sustainable businesses. It does not invest in sustainable growth. It invests in the sale of the business. That's when they make their money back. So the venture capitalist says, well, Mark, you look like the kind of guy who might succeed in this industry. I'll put 5 million, but I want 50 back. I want 500 back, because I'm going to put 5 million on 9 others, and I know I'm going to lose those. So I need yours to be the billion-dollar unicorn. We love unicorns, right? This is the Silicon Valley model. This is the model that venture capital and startups have built. Startup does not mean any new company. Startup is a Silicon Valley brand. Unless you're funded this way, if you have a new company, don't call yourself a startup unless you want to be associated with this horribly toxic model. This is what Shoshana Zuboff from Harvard Business School calls surveillance capitalism. It is the interplay between capitalism, which is about the accrual of wealth, and what happens when all that accrued wealth, the people who have it, invest in surveillance devices, which gives them intimate insight about all of our lives, which they then use to manipulate our behavior, which then makes them more money and accumulates more wealth. We get a feedback loop. And this is the feedback loop we've learned through the Cambridge Analytica revelations recently that has, in part, given us Trump, seen here with the heads of the top technology companies in the world before he was inaugurated into the White House. Now, these people, among themselves, know more about the world's population than any group has ever known, right? Sitting next to Trump. Anyone worried? No? And it's given us Brexit. So the less said about that, the better. But at least, you might be saying, Aral, at least we don't have a social credit score like China, right? Well, come on. Give us some time. We're working on it, okay? We're going to catch up. It's not like we're lazy. Facebook has a patent for doing exactly the same thing that China is doing with a social credit score. You know, we're just a little behind in Europe. We're going to catch up if we work hard at it. We'll get there. And some of you might be saying, well, Aral, come on. You're being a bit hard. Being a bit hard on capitalism. I mean, capitalism has given us some great things. It is true. We do have genes that stop your farts from smelling bad now, which you can buy, which is good. And, you know, small price to pay for, say, inciting genocide on Facebook, or turning our homes and our cities, our smart homes and smart cities, into panopticons, or really the fact that we are destroying our own habitats, not the world. Bacteria will survive no matter what we do. Our habitat. A recent United Nations report basically gave us 12 years to clean up our shit. Speaking of which, some people still go on to the world stage and say that their natural instinct for science tells them that climate science is wrong. Well, my knowledge of 200 years of human history in which we have believed every version of absolute bunk possible before the invent of the scientific method tells me that none of us has a natural instinct for science, or else it would have shown itself much earlier in our history. But then again, he might just be a product of his time. We don't know. Why are we in this situation, though? I think we're in it because we worship at the altar of one thing: growth. What kind of growth? Sustainable, manageable, decentralized? No. Astronomic growth. We call it exponential growth. Let me tell you how it works with an analogy. If you have a petri dish, you take a petri dish, and you put some nutrients into it, and you put some bacteria into it, and then you close the lid of the petri dish, thereby creating a closed system. The bacteria will start consuming the nutrients and growing and reproducing. They will reproduce, they will become increasingly more successful, they will grow. They will experience exponential growth in a closed system 1 or 2 generations before they go extinct because of lack of resources. In case I need to spell this out for you, the petri dish is the earth, and we are the bacteria. So of course there are 2 things we can do to try and get past this. One, we leave this ridiculous notion of infinite growth with finite resources behind. We try to take care of the planet that we have, the rock, the single rock that we have, on which we are a thin film of bacteria. And we try to find another rock to halve our risk of extinction. There are some people trying to do the latter, but I think we really need to focus on the former as well. So that's the problem. That's the reason you're thinking, what the fuck, I got up at 8 o'clock for this? Now I just want to go back to bed and cry. So let's not leave it there. We need to break the problem down so we can start to see how we can solve it. One, this is a problem based on the centralization of wealth and power in the hands of very few people, and then how they use it in an abusive manner. Today, every one of your smart devices, whether it's a smart TV or smart watch or a smart car or smart teddy bear or smart pill, they exist, works by collecting data about you. This is not the problem. This is a fact of life. This is how modern technology works. We're not going to change this. But there is a core fundamental question here. Who owns and controls this technology, the data, and the insight that comes from it? Now, that is crucial. If we can answer that we do, each one of us, each one of you, can own it and control it, then there is no problem, right? We have a system that is compatible with democracy and with human rights. If the answer is that a handful of corporations own and control it, and thereby it's made accessible to governments as well, then we're talking about a different type of social system. This is not a technology problem. This is a capitalism problem. It's a social problem. We're talking about a corporatocracy, ruled by corporations. And that's where we are today, literally now. This is not a future we're sleepwalking into. This is where we are. And it's important to know where you are. It's important to know where you want to get to. And then you can decide, start kind of trying to find ways of building bridges between those 2 points. So that's where we are. The problem is one of loss of personhood. And it's due to this data, which we misunderstand. We don't understand what data actually is. Because, for one thing, we use this generic term, data, when we're talking about information about rocks and when we're talking about information about people. But they're very different things. I can't emotionally hurt a rock. I can't physically hurt a rock. I cannot incarcerate a rock and deprive it of its freedom. I cannot deprive a rock of its life. I can do all of those things to people. So what does it mean if we build policies based on a generic notion of data without separating these 2 things? Who gets the shorter end of the stick? Is it the rock or is it us? I think it's us. This comes down to a question of personhood. Because traditionally, we have an understanding of what people are. But what is data about people? Let me give you an analogy. A person is a complex thing. Let's simplify it. What if instead of a person, I have a figurine, a little tiny plastic figurine? If I have enough data about this figurine, I can take a 3D scanner, right, and scan it in, And then if I have a 3D printer, I can create an almost exact replica of this figurine. Now imagine what I can do if I have enough data about you and the right algorithms with which to simulate you. And I'll give you a hint. I'm not interested in 3D printing you. I am very interested in owning you, though, and exploiting you for the rest of your life. I'm never going to sell you, though, right? It's kind of like that, never going to give you up. You're too valuable. So we hear, Facebook sells their data. No, too valuable. I'd never sell you. But I will exploit you. So this really comes back to personhood. Where we draw the boundaries of the self has changed. This is how we normally draw the boundaries of the self, at our biological boundaries. And over many years and over many, many struggles, many people who gave up their lives, we created a set of rules, a set of justice and legislation to protect these boundaries. We call it human rights law. But what happens when modern technology comes into the picture? When I have a thought that I don't want to keep just in my head, but I want to put on my phone, do I have a conversation with my phone? Is this the nature of our relationship? Do I say, hey phone, can you store this for me? Hey Siri, hey Alexa, hey Cortana. Is this my relationship? And it says, yeah, sure, I'll store it for you, thank you. If this is our relationship and how we see it, then what is surveillance? Signals capture between two actors having a conversation. It's what surveillance has always been since the time of the Stasi. Good, bad, okay, but it's what it's been. But what if our relationship to technology is different? What if when I have a thought, and I don't want to keep it just in my head, but I want to keep it on my phone, what I'm doing by storing it there is extending my mind, and thereby extending myself using this piece of technology? If this is the nature of our relationship to modern technology, then it makes perfect sense to extend our understanding of the boundaries of the self to include the technologies by which we extend ourselves. And this is a fundamental constitutional difference, because what does surveillance become then? It becomes an abuse, a violation of the self. And we already have a system of laws and governance that knows how to deal with violations of the self. We call it human rights law. So we don't need a Magna Carta for the web. We don't need digital rights. We need to apply the human rights we already have to an effective understanding of the boundaries of the self within the digital and networked age. So let's create some principles. 1, our data and technology is part of who we are. 2, data about individuals must belong to individuals. 3, data about the commons, the rocks, and everything else must belong to the commons. This is not rocket science, and yet we get it wrong, so I made a flowchart. Who should own and control the data? Right? Very simple flowchart. Is it about you? Then the answer is yes, then you. If it's not about you, then everyone, the commons. This is the basis of a fairer, progressive technology and infrastructure that would safeguard our personhood. But none of the mainstream political ideologies that I've seen get this right to some degree. And here's why. Another chart, right? Let's start with a question. Should corporations own and control us? Which political ideologies say yes to this? Well, it depends on the next question. Should they share this with governments? If you say yes, then this is the position of neoliberalism today. This is what we have, right? Here are the top tech companies sitting on the table with Trump. Some of them would like less Trump maybe, but they're willing to talk, they're willing to share. They're willing to share with China, with the Chinese government. They're willing to make some concessions. They're willing to do these things. It's good business, as long as it's good business, right? Neoliberalism, good business. As long as it's good business, it's okay, right? Then again, there's some people who say, no, only corporations should have all this information. And there we have libertarians. So we have people like Peter Thiel who want to, build island communities that are not linked to any government, where they can be the only CEO kings that rule, in their beautiful white manship of an island. he gave up this project. He invested, I think, 1.7 million. And if you can't get your own island, if you're a libertarian, you can always fuck off to Mars, where some people are trying to do that. And this is great because Musk, Elon, wants to have a direct democracy on Mars. Isn't that great? I can't argue with that. I mean, here's a king saying, fuck the monarchy, we want direct democracy. And I mean, that's great for a king to say. Of course, he does bust unions at his own company today. So, don't know how much to believe what he's saying. But what if we say no, corporations shouldn't own us? Well, okay, should governments own and control us? If we say yes, we're kind of getting to where traditional socialism is at today. So this is when Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, says that we should build a British digital corporation like the British Broadcasting Corporation, and it should have a social media function where they can use the data for the public good, right? So they own and control the data, they own and control you if it's data about you, and they're going to do it for the good. Okay, Jeremy? What if we say no to that as well? Well, there's this new development on the left in Europe, which seems to be a much more nuanced take on this. Should cities own and control us? And if you say yes to that, you get the Decode project model, the Barcelona city model that's being implemented right now. So if you read Yevgeny Morozov's work, Yevgeny and Francesca are working on the Decode project in Barcelona. And what they're saying basically is that states shouldn't own us because we know that they've been abusive, they're too big. Let's try and see if cities, because they're more local, if they own us, maybe that'll be better. But really, what Yevgeny is saying here is, trust me because I trust me. And I trust Francesca, and I trust the people around me. And maybe they're worthy of trust. I know them. Maybe they're worthy of trust. But is the next government going to be worthy of trust as well? Can they also guarantee that? Remember, people in the United States were perfectly fine with a surveillance state as long as Obama was in charge because he was cool. And he could shoot hoops, and he could string a sentence together. So they were okay with that. But even the white folks started getting a bit upset when Trump came to power. And you know, if the white folks are worried, there's something wrong. Right? Because the canaries in the coal mine have already died. They're the minorities and the people who are most affected. These are the people standing outside the mine going, there's a smell coming out of the mine, right? So you know something's wrong. It's what Corbyn says. Trust me because I trust me and I trust my Labour Party and I trust the people around me. It's exactly the same thing that Eric says, Eric Schmidt. He says, trust me because we should be trusted with you. It's exactly what Elon Musk says. Trust me because I trust me, and I will take care of you, right? So the thing that all of these have in common with regard to this particular question is that they are hierarchical. These are hierarchical institutions. These are centralized institutions. And is there hope for reforming them, for getting some of them to understand? Some of them do understand, they just don't want to do it. But some, maybe. I think maybe with the left, the socialist groups, there is a chance. I joined a group last year called DiEM25 that was created by Yanis Varoufakis, who was the finance minister of Greece when Greece was in the financial crisis brought on by the European Union and the Troika and the banks. And I loved the way he handled himself. He had to resign in the end, but he set up this political movement, pan-European. And what I liked about it is he said, look, we don't like neoliberalism and where neoliberalism has brought us, right? Where has neoliberalism brought us? Basically to the doorstep of fascism. So I agree with that. And we don't like fascism, and we don't like the extreme right. But we also think that there's potential in the European Union. We don't want to just do the Brexit thing. This is an organization that has kept the peace, at least, for X amount of years. It's not democratic. We have the only parliament in the world that cannot legislate, the European Parliament. The European Commission is a business club for boys. It's not democratic. But can we democratize it? Can we create democratic institutions in Europe? Even if we fail, even if the European project fails and the European Union fails, If we manage to create democratic institutions, we might have an alternative infrastructure for what comes next. So I like that. But they didn't have a technology arm, because none of the political parties really do right now, maybe except for the Pirates, and they didn't have anything else. So I went to them and I said, look, my friend was on the advisory committee, Renata, and I said, look, you need a technology, a progressive technology arm. You say you want to challenge neoliberalism. How can you challenge neoliberalism, to paraphrase Audre Lorde, with neoliberalism's tools? The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So Renata said, hey, pitch it to us. I did record the video about how they need a seventh pillar. They said, cool, let's do it. We launched it. It was all about empowering individuals, individual sovereignty as the basis of a healthy commons and encouraging a healthy commons. And of course, for organizations, for individuals, this means privacy. For organizations, it means transparency. And unfortunately, when I tried to actually implement these principles, which they loved in the written form, when I tried to implement it internally, we must open up, we must become more democratic. It was like, oh, wait. No. We have, And it was because it is still a hierarchical organization. So I left, and we had some disagreements on Assange, et cetera, being on the advisory committee, which I was not comfortable with at all because of his views on feminism, which I think are very last century. So I left. But I think there's hope there. I think that it could be reformed. I think there is something in the city level. This year, we worked with the city of Ghent in Belgium to create a prototype of a system where the city would fund it, it being individuals owning and controlling their own place on the internet, on the web, but they wouldn't control it. The individuals would have ownership. They would be the only ones with the keys. But they could choose to talk with each other, and they could choose to talk with the city if they wanted to. And the way it would work is they get a letter or a text message with a code on it. That code empowers them to get a domain name and this system that we built hosted for them for free, that the city pays for. And they go onto this website, and on this website they have a little bot, and the bot says, hey, let me set up your, let me help you set this up. Do you have the code? Yes. Boom. The financial transaction is over. This is the bit where you've actually paid for the system. The city has paid for it for you. Would you like your domain name? Yes, I've ordered it for you. Great. Now let's set up your site. So immediately they start customizing this site to make it their own. What we're doing in the background, which we never got to doing, and I'll tell you why, is we're trying to register that domain as quickly as possible because the current system sucks, so that by the time they're done making their site, their initial customization, hopefully it'll be ready. And their server will be set up for them. And it'll be hosted on an interoperable system that lots of different local groups can host. It's free and open source. So they've done that, and they're back, and now they're on their own website. They're up and running at their own domain, which they own and control, in a system that's federated that can talk to everyone else in the city and anywhere else where they're running this software, but the city won't pay for those people. They'll pay for just the citizens of the city. And they are the only ones that have the key to the private aspects. If they want to be public, they can be public. This solves that problem. We had 6 months of budget. We got to the point where you can see it running there, and then they cut the budget, because the next government coming in is a conservative government. The same thing is happening in Barcelona. So I wonder what's going to happen if, for example, there's a French person running a conservative in Barcelona. I wonder what's going to happen to Decode. So there is hope there, but we have to be very cognizant of the precarious nature of politics before we put too much trust in the people at these positions. The ones who are there today that we trust might be fine. What about tomorrow? So there's another option, though. If we answer no, how about individuals owning and controlling themselves? Well, that, if we answer yes to, is a different system. That's what I call a peerocracy. And it's different because it's not hierarchical. It's peer-to-peer. There are no centers of power. But if any of our current institutions are going to get us to this point, this is crucial. They have to exist not to exist. which I don't see any of our current political parties doing. They have to exist to create the infrastructure, the communications infrastructure, which would make themselves irrelevant. This is a big ask in current politics. So if we want this, we need to protect personhood and enable peer communication. And then we can watch as people empowered with projecting their agency within local groups to see what they do. That's what's so interesting about this. We've had this system work in the past in small agrarian communities. We call it direct democracy, we call it maybe anarchism to some degree. But it's only worked in small communities because of the limitation of the communication systems. But we don't have that limitation anymore. So why are we building our infrastructure based on the social systems that were only possible pre-digital, pre-network today? So how do we get from where we are to where we want to be, this beautiful, wonderful, rainbow future? Well, what's interesting is both of these places exist today. They just exist on different islands. Most of us live in the mainstream because that's where you don't need technical knowledge. It's the norm. It's what you get born into. But there are people with technical knowledge who are already protecting their privacy, already communicating with peer-to-peer systems. These things exist. But there's this sea between them. And some of us who are living on this beautiful rainbow island expect you to be a master swimmer so you can just come across. And if you can't, for whatever reason, maybe it's an accessibility issue, then we just say, well, you don't care enough, right? This is the free and open source world, the problem that I have with the free and open source world, the arrogance in some people there who say, unless you care about your privacy, unless you care, unless you're going to spend hours to configure these things and learn about it, well, dude, I've got 3 kids maybe, you know? Maybe I have a disability that makes that difficult. Why are you excluding me? That's arrogant. We need to build a convenient bridge between these two. And that is what we're missing. That's what we're working on. So let's make a plan. How do we do this? We regulate and we replace. Regulation. We can't regulate if our MPs who are supposed to be regulating are taking selfies with the people that they're supposed to be regulating. This is at the European Parliament, Swedish MP, after a session where they were supposed to be grilling Mark Zuckerberg, taking a selfie with them. Can't do that. We already have lobbying, the corporate finance that's influencing political policy making. We already have revolving doors where I might be at the commission supposed to be regulating Facebook. In 5 years' time, I'll be working at Facebook. Problematic. We have public-private partnerships, multi-stakeholderism, co-regulation. All of these things are the same thing. It's institutional corruption. Lawrence Lessig. This is the influence of corporate finance and public policy making. So we need to target that before we can regulate. We also need to understand some fundamentals, like don't send an ambassador to Silicon Valley if you're Denmark. All right, don't do that because you're supposed to be regulating them. You are a democratically elected government. You do not put a corporation on the same level as you by sending an ambassador. You regulate them. You don't give up the only card you have because literally they're richer than you. So the only card you have is your democratic legitimacy. You don't give that up. You don't, for example, take a company like Palantir, again, if you're Denmark, Peter Thiel's Palantir, and put them in charge of predictive policing in Denmark, which is what's happening today. Have you seen Minority Report? It's basically that without all the arm waving. You don't need to wave your arms. This is literally a company that called itself Palantir, the all-seeing stone that the evil wizard uses in Lord of the Rings. They're not hiding anything. There are people who are. Let's learn to recognize them. When a group comes to you and says, hey, we are Singularity University, let's at least be able to say, you are not a university. You are a public relations arm. You're a lobbying arm of Silicon Valley in Europe. They're not a university. So let's find out who our allies are in this, right? We cannot regulate as long as these companies are seen as socially acceptable. There's a huge parallel with the technology industry and the tobacco industry. At the beginning, remember, cigarettes were said to be good for your health. There were doctors and dentists who were telling you which cigarettes they smoked, which felt better, right? And then something happened. They became socially unacceptable, and that's when we were able to regulate effectively. So what can we do? Well, maybe we can stop being the doctors in the ads. When your friend on Facebook says, I've just got a job at Google, maybe 136 of us, some of us very respected people in the web development communities, shouldn't all be saying, congratulations, you are now working for a people farmer. That's so good. I hope one day I'll be able to work there and track people and profile them and manipulate their behavior. Gosh, you have that special sauce. I'm not violating anyone's privacy here, by the way. That's a public post open to anyone on Facebook. Maybe we should learn that if we have privacy conferences, they shouldn't be sponsored by Palantir and Google and Microsoft, right? This is this year. But I first brought this up in 2016. Right? People are angry. Who was angry? Well, that was me on Twitter. Oh my fucking goodness, are you fucking kidding me? Amsterdam Privacy Week sponsored by. People are angry. Okay. And even before that, Access Now had RightsCon, and they had the same sponsors, Facebook, Google. These are companies that literally exist to violate your human right to privacy. That's how they make their money, sponsoring RightsCon. Right? I've not spoken at conferences that have privacy themes sponsored by these companies. I'll happily speak at a web conference sponsored by them. I'm not giving them any legitimacy there. But if it's a privacy conference, I'm saying they're okay. And you know what? They are not okay. And we have to protect the legitimacy that we have. So I was really happy to see that this year, other people started. Other speakers started saying, no, we're not going to. Thank you for offering to have us. We're not going to do it. They set up a site called Funding Matters. And they basically said, look, we are not happy with Palantir in this case. Palantir was the drop too far. So in a few years, it'll be Google. It'll be Facebook. Give it 5 or 10 years. People who work at these companies are going to be hiding their badges at conferences because they're ashamed. I've seen people from Halliburton already doing that many years ago. It's going to happen. Wait for it. And so I'm very happy to put my name on this list as well. So we got to regulate, but to be able to regulate, we need to really move beyond a lot of this corruption that we have. And then we replace them. But what do we replace them with? Do we replace them with Brave? Who's heard of Brave? Brave's the new browser. Anyone using Brave in here? Look, they're fixing the problem. It's on a mission to fix the web. They say you are not the product. How cool is that? Now, that's one of their websites. These are for people who are not paying them. Now, for the people who they want to pay them, there is the basic attention token site. And there you understand that the Brave browser is only stage 1. Stage 2 is a system where they sell their product, which is your attention. Right? So you're not the product until you are the product. But hey, this is by the co-creator of JavaScript, co-founder of Mozilla. What's going on? Surely we can trust Mozilla, right? Yeah? I mean, it's not like Mozilla gets literally billions of dollars from Google and all of their funding from surveillance capitalists, right? Well, yeah, they do. They do. That's exactly what they do. Well, what about AdBlock Plus? Who uses AdBlock Plus to protect themselves here from tracking? Let's just, thank goodness for AdBlock Plus. I don't even have to say anything against them because rival Ghostery has already said something. Accused AdBlock Plus of extorting money from advertisers. What? With their acceptable ads program, which says that companies like Google can pay them to not be blocked. Did you know that? So at least we have Ghostery. Whew. At least we have Ghostery, right? Who uses Ghostery? Yeah. Okay, well, it turns out that Ghostery was actually created by an advertising company at the very beginning, and it helps the advertising industry with their metrics. Now, this is what I call lovingly the bullshit layer cake that we're in today. And, oh, I know, good morning. And the cherry on top of the bullshit layer cake has, of course, got to be Bitcoin and blockchain, right? We love Bitcoin and blockchain because it's going to save the world, isn't it? Bitcoin and blockchain, a few self-serving white men There are hardly any women or minorities in this community, pretending to be messiahs for the world's impoverished, marginalized, and unbanked masses, claim to have created billions of dollars of wealth out of nothing. Or as I like to call it, perhaps more plainly, this is a libertarian masturbation fantasy that changes our natural resources into money in the pockets of a small group of people. Thankfully, Andrew was more poetic in how he placed it in Bitcoin Must Die. He said, if Bitcoin were to cease trading tomorrow, 0.5% of the world's electricity demand would simply disappear. And he ends it by saying, Bitcoin is made from ashes. And if ashes were legal tender, humanity would burn everything in sight and call it progress. That's kind of what's happening. And it's not even decentralized. Because you do not decentralize something by making a billion copies of one database, which you can prove are the same database. You decentralize, the only thing you decentralize there is trust. That is very different to having a billion different databases in a billion different places. So we have to be really careful of blockchain snake oil salesmen, or just blockchain salesmen, I guess. Or blockchain oil, is that a thing? Maybe, should be. I'm not talking about startups. That's a Silicon Valley model. I'm talking about building stay-ups, sustainable businesses that we fund alternatively, because VC is not going to fund it. We must fund it from the commons for the common good. We must build technology differently, ethical technology. And that's technology built by ethically designed organizations. And it's very simple. It's all about respect. Respect human rights in what you're building. Respect human effort. Respect human experience. That's all ethical technology is. We get the basics wrong. We abuse human rights. And then we have to not practice design, we practice decoration, because the core is rotten and it smells and it looks horrible. We need to decorate it so people don't get that whiff, so they don't run away, so they stay while we farm them, right? A friend of mine, Trine Falbe from Denmark, wrote this book, White Hat UX. I would highly recommend you read it. She talks about all of this. We can actually see that there are companies like Purism who are building full stacks, hardware, software services that address this problem, that are freedom technologies. So maybe start supporting them. They also adopted the Ethical Design Manifesto. At the very least, for ourselves, to protect ourselves, we can learn within the current mainstream which company sells products and which company sells you, and choose the one that actually sells products, even if they are a trillion-dollar company. We can start to use the alternatives that are coming out that are usable, beautiful, like Wire for private messaging. We used this with our team in Ghent when we were working remotely. Works beautifully. You can get it on any app store. It's free and open source as well. We can start using the alternatives. Twitter, closed source, farms you. Mastodon, which has been going for 2 years now, has thousands of instances, thousands of Twitter.coms, all that can talk to each other, and millions of people using it. So start looking at that. Free and open source. You know you're not being farmed. You're not the product. I have my own. Mastodon for one, a Twitter.com for one, but I can talk to everyone else's Mastodons, Twitter.coms. Our two-person not-for-profit that we have with Laura, we work on the same things. We work to regulate, not legislatively, but technologically. So we build a free and open source tool called Better for Mac and iOS, where you can block these trackers. We don't have to legislate. We can technologically say no. And of course, it's on our website and on our source control. But we're also working on replacing them, because I want to see a future where each one of you own and control your own place on the web. And this is the place that all of your smart things connect to. And this is where you have control. So let's start thinking about how organizations can be created differently. Instead of organizations owning all of the functionality, the intellectual property, all of the things that give it value, what if we all owned those, and then we got together in groups when we wanted to, but the organization became an aggregator? What if we inverted the tree, the hierarchy there? And this is a system that's interoperable and free and open source, so lots of businesses could be hosting these nodes that belong to you, but they don't have access because you're the only one that has the key. Then we start building a healthy economy on an ethical core. That's when we start building this bridge between where we are and where we want to be. It's like the training wheels for the peer world that we need to move towards. Then we can go back to this question where we ask who owns and controls the data, the technologies, the insights, and we can say we do, and we live in a democracy. We can go back to the very first question, are we people or are we property? And we can say we are once again people. Now that's the future that I want to live in, and that's the future that I hope we can create together. Thank you. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you.
Ça met une bonne patate.
So some light entertainment to start your day with then.
Yeah, it gives a good potato. Est-ce qu'on a le droit, je pense, à une question? S'il y en a une dans le public, on la prend. Si vous avez ça, si vous n'avez pas peur. Il est en colère, mais à mon avis, il peut répondre. Ok, ça va être au cocktail. Ah, une question dans l'assistance.
There's one there as well.
Il y a un micro. On a 3 minutes. We have 3 minutes left.
Okay, cool.
Je vais le faire en français.
Ouais.
Bonjour,
Bonjour.
merci pour la conférence.
Thank you. D'accord.
Que pensez-vous de l'initiative de Tim Berners-Lee?
You get that?
Yeah, so you're talking about the SOLID initiative out of MIT. I like to see where it goes, but when I evaluate these sort of projects, one of the main things that I look for is how is it funded.
You can explain it to people who don't know it.
So SOLID is a project that Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web, is now working on to decentralize things. And I was asked, what do I think about it? The way I evaluate all of these sort of projects is I look at how they're funded to begin with, to understand where they can go, what their success criteria is. And Tim has venture capital for this now. So that's a big question mark for me, right? The other thing, and I talked with Tim about this many years ago when he was presenting some of his ideas that became SOLID, is there's a huge user, I hate the word user, it's an othering. It's like, you're not calling them people anymore. There's a huge experience challenge there because they're designing from the inside out. They're thinking about the data structures and the protocols and everything. But people want to use things that are simple to use. So if you design from the outside in, then you might actually find that that completely affects the decisions, even at the protocol level, and it makes your life harder. But they're not necessarily doing that. So I had a chat with them about that. I don't think that that's getting across. I would love to see where it goes at this point. But I know that if they have venture capital, it means they have to get sold at some point. So who are they going to get sold to if they're successful? So I have a big problem with making anything that has venture capital successful because we've seen this over and over again, right? The promises at the beginning simply cannot be maintained because you lose control when you're sold. So I'd love to see where it goes. Things might come out of it that we don't even know. Other people might fork it because it's free and open source, what they're doing. So let's see what happens. The more the merrier. I love to see people working on different things, but I really want to see people working on things funded in a way where they could succeed. If they're successful, they can succeed long term and it be sustainable, instead of just feeding back into the machine because Google buys you when you're successful, if that makes sense. Yeah?
Does that make sense?
Do we have time for one quick question? We have a minute.
We have a minute for last question. I have a question.
Is that a question?
Oh, you have
No.
a question? No,
No.
she's just like, yeah. Are you optimistic or not? Like, people say, I'm nothing to hide, so
Yeah.
it's okay,
Well, I'm here, right? And I'm working on these things. So I wouldn't say that I'm pessimistic or optimistic. I would say I'm probably a realist with imagination.
Okay.
And maybe that's all we need.
Good. Thank you very much, Alain.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On va se retrouver dans 2 minutes avec Jean-Christophe Paris. C'est un super talk qui explique les modèles mentaux et comment on se trompe dans nos choix, y compris sur le digital. À 11h, il devait y avoir Léa Verrou. Désolé, mais elle a ce qu'on appelle un petit problème, un cas de force majeure. Et je peux vous dire que c'est un cas de force majeure. Elle sera remplacée par Marie Terrier qui va vous expliquer comment elle a implémenté avec Google, comment elle a implémenté avec
It's okay, I
Google,
do know they exist.
Google Assistant for la Fnac. Voilà. Elle a éprouvé le truc et ça marche bien, it's good. Non, I'm kidding. Ça, c'est Marie Terrier à 11h. Et donc, Jean-Christophe Paris, dans 3 minutes, ici. Bougez pas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Cutting up a surgery, BA for the niggas that ain't heard of me.